Walter.
Thank you, sir. Mike, please. One of the people that testified made the comment that over half of the respondents to a survey said that they would consider creating a rental. I think the information I saw was 37% said they would, which is still a fair percentage to me. Is that the intent of this? Is it to create rentals with ADUs? I understand the original thing about granny flats and mother-in-laws, and my father in the 50s converted part of a garage so that my grandmother could be moved into it. I don't know whether the city had anything for it, against it, but he did it. So I get that part, but to do it as rentals, and I guess my real question, Mike, is why wouldn't this just become student housing? We are a college town.
I mean, rentals are one aspect of the ordinance. It still allows, so if you're an elderly couple, it would allow additional rental income. Maybe instead of go to Good Sam, you're able to stay within the neighborhood. Could also, maybe for an elderly single person, you could allow maybe additional income, but you could also allow for a caretaker on the property to mow the lawn, take care of grocery supplies, things of that nature, take care of you. I think those are all valid outcomes of the ordinance. But also other proposals would be elderly family member. It could be yourself and renting out the single-family dwelling. But really, those are the real intentions of the ordinance. Does that answer your question?
It helps.
Okay.
Bill?
John.
I'm the council liaison for planning and zoning, so I was at all of the meetings that the council, or the planning and zoning, discussed this. And they have answered all of the questions I had, because at the beginning of the discussion, I was against this. I thought, R1, R2 is, almost carved in stone as far as the neighborhood, as far as the number of people that could live there, the number of different living conditions that could exist. And over the time and listening to the arguments pro and con made by various people, a lot of them people that were members of planning and zoning, and then other people that came in, my idea changed. And I think that what the planning and zoning has done, and then Mike at the city, they have answered the questions. And I don't think, for example, there's been a discussion about, Walter just brought up, valid point. Is this just a way to get rental property on your property? Well, as Mike said, you can do that right now. And what we're trying to do here is to eventually, it is going to be someone that is not a member of your family, but to start with, it's going to be a member of your family that is supposed to live in these conditions. And then as far as changing the neighborhood vision of itself and the constitution of the neighborhood, anything you do is going to be so expensive. You would be much better off, if you want a duplex, go out and buy a lot and build a duplex, because by the time you build one of these things or do the changes to a house to put it on the inside for no more than 600 square feet, and then you have to read it to rent it or lease it out, it'll be so far out of the ballpark you won't be able to do that. If you just take a look at, this is how much I spent, this is how much I got to get out of it. I don't think that's a valid a valid consideration. I think that with all of the discussion that's been done, all the research that was done by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the information that Mike gave the Planning and Zoning Commission. Anything they asked for, he got. I think it's a good idea. And then one other thing, the number of people that are actually going to do this is very, very small. And I think I will be long dead and buried before 50 of them in the city of Moscow are put up.
To John's point there, Mike, you had one of the slides you had showed up there that we had 68%, is either 63 or 68% in favor of it, and then they asked the question, would you do this? And I think there was a small portion, maybe 14%?
28.
Or something?
28 people.
And it showed the percentage up
Said they
here.
would even do it.
Yeah, of the people that responded.
Right.
Would you likely add an accessory dwelling unit to the property? I just wanted to point that out because that was a pretty good slide right there. And there was
So you had about
13%
13%
said they
agree.
would, or they would think about doing
Well, agree is strong, she's 19.
it. Okay. I'll go to Wayne, and I'll come back to you, Walter.
Well, John, I appreciate what you're saying, and I suspect that you're probably right. At $100 to $150 a square foot, it makes it pretty tough to build something like that as an accessory dwelling unit. However, when we pass an ordinance, I don't feel that we pass an ordinance using speculation. We pass it saying, this can happen, and you can't allow it to happen. And so the questions have been asked, the questions have been answered. The question now is, do we as individuals agree with the answers? The comprehensive plan speaks pretty strongly about maintaining the character of neighborhoods. And, you know, I've been listening to the arguments pro and con on these accessory dwelling units for quite some time, and shifting back and forth on my feelings on that, depending upon the conversation I'm having. But I'm settling down now with the final thoughts that when folks do buy their residence in an R1 or an R2, they bought it as a single-family residence. They didn't buy it with the idea that this neighborhood could be created with higher density because somebody is now able to put in a 600-square-foot rental unit. And we can call it a mother-in-law house, and it may start out that way, but ultimately, the likelihood of it becoming a rental property is very real. And I don't believe that most folks that live in R1 and R2 care to see rental property. In fact, if you've lived in an R1 or R2 neighborhood that's been a pretty nice neighborhood and it's all owner-occupied, unfortunately, we've seen the cases where homes that folks had to move because of job or whatever, and they weren't able to sell the house turned into rental property. And very, very seldom is that home taken care of and maintained to the standards that it was when it was owner-occupied. I digress a little bit, but I am at the point where I will not support this ordinance because I don't believe rental property should be installed in R1 or R2 neighborhoods.
Walter, I'll go to you next.
Responding to John Weber's comments about or maybe it was the mayor regarding the 13% that are likely. Well, if that's next door to a particular person's house, that's 100% likely. So it's a matter of whose ox is getting gored, I think, and I'm coming around to I think where Wayne may be that we need to. I'm not sure that I'm ready to gamble that it's going to be only next door to people that won't mind it.
Art.
Yeah, I've been listening, and a couple of thoughts come into my mind, and one is that relative to the character of the neighborhood, establishing, as we discussed earlier, a garage in your backyard has every bit as much visual impact on the neighborhood as an accessory dwelling unit separate. But the other thing to remember is a lot of these accessory dwelling units can also be contemplated internally to the existing structure, in which case there's no impact to the visuals of the neighborhood whatsoever. They also are designed to include one off-street parking space for each accessory dwelling unit, which helps with that. Not more than 2 people per unit. That's not so bad either, I don't think. And also, I think the biggest factor of all is the fact that one or the other of the 2 units has to be owner-occupied. And I can't see owners living in proximity to anything terribly noisy or invasive. And so I think that keeps a good lid on the impact of nuisance to the rest of the neighborhood. Certainly no more nuisance than the occasional bad neighbor who moves in and kind of trashes out the house, parks the RV in the front yard and everything else that might be going on. So for me, I think it provides a valuable asset to people, both elderly in the beginning and then perhaps later on as a rental if necessary, but I don't see it as necessarily increasing the density to the point of turning R1 or R2 neighborhoods into R3 and R4 neighborhoods, both in terms of the way the units are constructed and the way in which they behave within a neighborhood, and especially with only 13% indicating that they might do so.
Jim, you were on P and Z. So
Yeah, I've been through this on the planning and zoning from its inception, and when you look at the numbers about how many people in town actually favor this, that's kind of supportive of it. That a small minority of people who favor it would even consider doing one says it's not going to be a real prevalent thing. We're not going to have a building boom of accessory dwelling units around town right away. The character of the neighborhood thing is the number one thing that I think goes against it, and all the conditions that have been put on this to control that, I think it make it unlikely that the character of the neighborhood would be destroyed. You could only have two additional people living on that property. You could have 2 additional people living in any single family now. You can take any single family residence and turn it into a rental now with none of these restrictions, without adding any off-street parking or the owner having to live there. So all these conditions have been put on, and people that favor the conditional use permit, I think the conditions that anyone in the neighborhood would be looking for have been addressed, where the owner has to live on the property. You have to have an additional off-street thing. It can only be 600 square feet, and only 2 additional people can live in the property. So I don't think that there's anything that goes on in one of these that can materially change the character of the neighborhood. That if I wanted to have a rental unit in a single-family neighborhood, I could go buy it and turn it into that and not have any of these restrictions on me. So the accessory dwelling unit doesn't really affect the character of the neighborhood the way it's written in this ordinance.
Dan, you listened to this on the admin committee on
We did,
March 23rd?
and I had in that committee a liaison to and a former member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, so, and obviously they've spent, we're looking clear back at 2012, so this wasn't hurried through at all. There's a lot of work by staff and Planning and Zoning on something, so it's not something that we're entering into lightly. And I think that, all of the I's have been dotted and the T's are crossed, and I agree with Jim and John there that this isn't something that's going to be made a lot of all quick. And then I look back at some of the testimony at P&Z, and we're going to be bringing some stuff into compliance that is out of compliance right now that's out there. I mean, I don't know how many there are, but at least that way there's something that we'll know a little more about, because we're going to have the deed restrictions on them and everything like that. So I think that with that, I'm going to go ahead and make a motion here, and we'll see how we come down. I'd make a motion that we approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules, requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that they be read by title and published by summary.
I'll second that.
Okay, we've got a motion by Dan and a second by John to approve the ordinance under the suspensions of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings and the ordinance be read by title and published by summary. Walter?
Thank you, Mayor. Jim's comments regarding you can turn any single-family residence into a rental now, I believe are true. But you cannot turn that lot into two single-family residences. You can only have one. But this would allow two, if you consider, two people in one unit as a family and the main house or vice versa as a family. So yes, you can have rentals in a R1, R2 now, but you can't have two single-family residences on the same lot now. I've lived in R1, and I did it for the reasons that someone spoke about earlier, and liked it that way, and really wasn't intending to see it changed. And I'm like whoever made the comment that we can't do this based upon whether or not anybody's going to use it or not. We have to presume that people will, because it'll be available. So I'm going to have to not agree with the motion.
Wayne?
Well, one final comment. When we go to a single-family residence that's been turned into a rental unit, we do have the boarding house ordinance that falls into place where only 4 non-related people can live in it. And there's still an issue with more cars parked on the street than, as a rule, with a regular family. So I don't think that's a good comparison. I don't think that that's a fair comparison. And I still think that if you're looking at this and speculating that, well, there's not going to be very many built anyway, I don't think that that's the proper way to pass an ordinance. And if you're the person in an R1 or R2 that suddenly has somebody build one next to you, then you are affected by it. So it does change the character of the neighborhood. And so I've been very seldom am I a 5-to-1 vote, but I can see it coming this time, and I don't care.
Okay, well, with that, I'll start the roll with John.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
Aye. Not 5-to-1, Wayne. No.
All right.
Okay, it's 4-2, but it passes, so.
Go past.
Stephanie, this is ordinance number 2015-6.
6.
Did you say 6?
Yeah, 06.
Okay, 06. Okay, so we have ordinance number 2015-06, an ordinance of the City of Moscow, Idaho, a municipal corporation of the State of Idaho, providing for the amendment of Moscow City Code Title IV, Chapters 2, 6, 11, and 12, providing for the definition of accessory dwelling unit, providing for the establishment of specific use standards for accessory dwelling units, providing for the allowance of accessory dwelling units as a permitted accessory use within all residential zoning districts, providing for an amendment of accessory building setback requirements, providing that the provisions of this ordinance be deemed severable, and providing that this ordinance be in full force and effect from the date of its passage, approval, and publication according to law.